Our ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa has delivered his closing remarks on the outcomes of the National Executive Council meeting after a weekend-long discussion with the party's highest structure. Let's continue to bring you more analysis, and we're joined by a political analyst, Dr. Ebrahim Harvey. Dr. Harvey, thank you very much for joining us at eNCA, but I want your takeaways from the President's closing remarks this evening.
Well, to be very frank with you, flat, uninspiring and unpresidential. I listened very carefully to him. Really, we expected much more. Forget about the Phala scandal. We'll talk about that later on. This is the end of his 5-year term as president of the ANC, the last NEC of the year. In fact, for 2 years they haven't had it, and 5 weeks before the ANC's national conference. Really, I mean, the things that he spoke about, I mean, we know about these things. They're in the media daily. The important matters, the things that really matter. And you must remember, at the end of next week is the Parliamentary Independent Panel's report. We don't know how much was discussed and how much did he reveal in this NEC meeting, although, and it's questionable, you know, I was thinking about it. Him saying that the public protector has gagged him. Well, you know, he gagged himself. If you look at for the past few months since Fraser laid those charges, he hardly wanted to speak, so it was convenient for him to say the public protector has gagged him. But what powers does the public protector have? I wonder if the public protector, with the seriousness of the situation, has the powers to gag the president of the country. And surely, you know, if he was interested in speaking, he could have challenged it or did something. But the really serious problems with that speech, really the very lackluster, the main issues, you know, it's under his watch, and it's not necessarily an adverse reflection on him personally. We have the worst socio-economic and political crisis in the country and gripping the ANC itself from the time he took office in 2018. And I mean, when he won the president in 2017, December at Nazareth. It's the worst situation ever. I mean, he had no control over COVID, but surely if you look at these promises and undertakings, he made some dents in the anti-corruption crusade that he came to office with, but many other things. We're in the worst electricity, water, sanitation, sewerage crisis ever, arguably, you know, in the history of this country, let alone post-apartheid South Africa. In 2019, the ANC dropped big in the national elections. It lost the powerhouse of production in the 2021 elections. I don't know, you know, the president is supposed to give some overall appraisal, and frankly so. He says that the NEC should be frank about the ANC's failures, but I feel that he wasn't frank about his own failures and weaknesses. I mean, you know, the one big thing, and I think we've only seen it coming through in the past 1.5 years, is the anti-corruption. He's made massive gains there in that regard. Honestly, he has. I think it's the big thing that one has to recognize. But otherwise, very serious disappointments with his performance. But I want to turn to what I think is a very important thing, the Phala thing. I think he should have already, I mean, he told the Integrity Commission that he's been gagged. But I think he should have said something to the people, you know, in his closing remarks. And he didn't touch on Phala at all. And what is striking is that a week from now, his fate and future will be known by that panel. They have to release their report towards the end of this week. I must tell you, the calls, however, for him to step aside is premature. It seems, you know, I'm surprised because the ANC, NEC should know. The reason why Ish Magashule and others had to step aside because they were formally charged. It doesn't matter how suspicious the circumstances are of the allegations against you. No, it doesn't matter. Even if it appears there's a prima facie case, you have to have formally charges laid by the law enforcement agencies. Only then does the step aside rule kick in.
And that's something, of course, the Electoral Committee of the ANC is reiterating, saying that it can't really act on step aside unless there has been that person appearing in court, or it can't be via the court charges. I want to touch on then the coalition that he mentioning that the coalitions are failing flat in these different municipalities. But is that really determined, up to him to determine, given that that's the electorate, and we saw it coming through in the advent of those coalition governments back in 2016, and it seems like that's what the voter is going to do going forward, and even possibly in the 2024 elections?
Yes, well, I mean, Ramaphosa has very little control over coalition politics, whether at national or local level. We've had local coalition governments, and you must see local coalition governments' emergence in inverse proportion to the electoral decline of the ANC at the polls. That's how all these little small, independent parties arise, and, that has made local government so combustible. You can see in Tshwane, in Joburg in particular. But I'll tell you something, so lackluster was Ramaphosa's speech. I mean, if you ask me personally, despite all the weaknesses and failures I referred to, I still think, given the politics and the factionalism and who the other presidential contenders would be in December, I still think we'd be better off if he wins a second term. But will he see that this is the thing? Because if the independent panel finds against him, there's a Ebrahim Harvey case, and it leads to his impeachment, he can't stand in December. He can't stand for re-election. Mbeki raised a critical question, which I don't know if this NEC really dealt with. Mbeki said, what if the panel finds that he's got a Ebrahim Harvey case? What is the ANC then going to do? Did they deal with that question? We don't know at all. We'll see, when this panel's report comes out. But for the next 5 weeks could be a very tumultuous, stormy period, because if the panel finds against Ramaphosa, we are in very serious trouble. He cannot stand, because if it finds against him, it doesn't necessarily mean it will be impeached, but it will strengthen the impeachment process, almost to make it certain that he will suffer an impeachment. Not only, but the country is in a massive political crisis, and he then won't stand for election in December.
The very glaring crisis that you're painting there. And while the president doesn't speak on the Phala matter, some other presidential hopefuls like Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma seem to have spoken out publicly in the media, saying that it's quite interesting and questionable why the president would keep the money in his house and not in a bank, for example. What do you make of these assertions?
It is absolutely, without any shred of doubt, right. Obviously, which is partly why there are many other serious criminal acts that occurred there. We'll see what the panel's report says. But it is absolutely without any shred of, in fact, it's one of his weakest arguments, to be frank with you. And I think those lawyers, the 3 lawyers in that independent panel, they're probably going to see through it. I mean, if it's a legitimate business, this is what Dlamini-Zuma is saying. Why do you go and stash so much money elsewhere in the house and in couches, etc.? It's average intelligence that tells you it's quite bizarre. I mean, to say that it was part of his business. Aside from the fact, and she's right also, that what is he doing running that business, being president, is not supposed to. There's a clash of interest there. But more than anything else, it's ludicrous in the extreme to say that it's a legitimate business that is running and then can stash away all the money in the couch, which is what she emphasized, and she's completely right about that,
And talking about Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, it came out, of course, today, speaking to the Electoral Committee, that she's one of those presidential hopefuls or top 6 hopefuls that have come forward with their finances ahead of the elective conference, among others Ronald Lamola, just to think of some top of my head. What do you think of the ANC's new stance on the financial, announcing your finances ahead of the conference?
No, Kgalema Motlanthe. He emphasized that, and the way I know him to be so morally upright, that the thrust of the arguments it's absolutely correct, and it's born out of what has been all the patronage and corruption and what's been happening at ANC electoral conferences, money changing hands and a whole lot of things happening. He was mindful of that, And I think it's a very, very important a requirement that is imposed as head of the electoral committee, you know, for this transparency, and all electoral campaigns, you know, sources of finance or funding must be disclosed and full transparency about it. It goes without any doubt, and in fact, it flows out of the Zondo Commission of report. I mean, you know, because central to corruption in the ANC and government has been this question of money, you know. So I think Ramaphosa, Motlanthe was absolutely correct to emphasize that will be a firm requirement, you know, at this electoral conference in December, that all the delegates, and especially those standing for election, will have to comply with.